I grew up in the 80s, and my grandparents always came to our house for the holidays, but one year we had to go to theirs for Easter. That was the year my grandfather died, and he was too sick to travel at the time. I was 8, and my mom always talked about growing up in the country, but had never taken me out there herself. Not while I was old enough to remember, at least. I asked to go all the time, but there was always something else we had to do. Looking back, I understand she was just trying to keep me away from those woods. But I used to think that we were just really busy people. We drove out there that Sunday morning with plans to stay overnight and go home Monday, but we ended up leaving early. On the way, Mom warned me that the woods were filled with wildcats and wolves, so I wouldn't be allowed to go outside. That was pretty disappointing, since the whole reason I wanted to go was to play in the woods. I was old enough to understand my mom was an overprotective parent, but too young to recognize the genuine danger in a child wandering through the forest alone. After the holiday festivities ended, my cousins went home, and everyone was ready for bed. It was like 8 p.m. For the first time in my life, I didn't complain about an early bedtime. I stayed in my room long enough to make sure that everyone else had fallen asleep, and then I tried to sneak out my window, but it was nailed shut. It was surprising, but I didn't put any thought as to why, only that I now had to sneak out the back door. I took a flashlight, lighter, Snickers bar, and a bottle of water with me to feel like I was really going on an adventure, and then I crept out without being noticed. There was a small trail I followed into the woods. I have no idea how far I went, but I walked for at least 15 to 20 minutes before stopping by a fallen tree and trying to start a fire. I wanted to use the log as a bench like they do in the movies, so I set my stuff down and started gathering firewood. Soon, I had a small pile, and I used my candy wrapper as kindling, but once it was gone, the fire went out pretty quickly. I grew frustrated when my pile of damp limbs wouldn't stay lit. I chose to continue my journey instead. I pretended to be a big game hunter, searching for a grizzly bear, never dreaming I would actually run into a predator, let alone something out of a horror movie. A few minutes later, I heard growling ahead of me and froze in my tracks. That's when the danger really sank in. I didn't know what to do. So I tried to find the source with my light, but I couldn't see anything. Even so, the growl grew deeper and more menacing, like it was angry about the light. I was instantly nauseous. I really thought that I was going to puke. A surge of panic sent me running away, and the moment I turned around, something huge began moving through the treetops, chasing after me. It sounded big, like a big baboon. I was crying so hard that I couldn't see the ground in front of me, and I tripped over something that sent me sprawling. When I opened my eyes, I was flat on my back, staring straight up, and the flashlight was still in my hands. Without thinking, I pointed it into the trees. I saw a hulking black furry mass. It looked like a wolf, except it was the size of a man. I only caught a glimpse before it darted out of the light and retreated several feet away. But it continued to growl, like it wanted to tear me apart. I wasn't aware of it when everything was happening, but apparently I'd been screaming my head off the whole time. It woke everyone in the house. My mom and grandmother came running through the forest, wielding a shotgun, and found me lying there. Mom picked me up and rushed me away. Over her shoulder, I saw grandmother fire around into the trees, and there was a final loud snarl as we ran back to the house. I was in plenty of trouble, but on the way home the next day, I learned what happened to my mom in those woods. When she was 16, she had a similar experience walking the same trail with a friend. They'd stayed out a little late, and it got dark before they could make it back. They heard a strange sound off the path and saw a tall black dog creature eating a huge buck. The animal was shredded, and the creature dug into the body with its human-shaped hands and long claws instead of using its teeth. That was the last time she went into the forest until she had to come save me. I understand why she didn't just tell me the truth, but I would have been far less likely to sneak out if she'd been honest. Probably. Either way, we both learned a valuable lesson from the experience. She never lied to me again, and I haven't been in any forest since that day myself. Two years ago on Easter Sunday, I was living in a mountain cabin doing the homesteading thing. I finally had gotten back late at night after an entire day at my parents' house, and all I wanted to do was go to sleep. I grew up in the woods and slept outside more than inside, and I've always just really loved nature. If I had a choice, I was going to choose outdoors every time. It was the same with my cabin. I had a really nice bed, but I preferred taking my sleeping bag out to the gazebo. It was close enough to the stream to hear the running water, much better than any sleep noise app. In the 5 years I lived on that property, I genuinely can't begin to guess how many nights I spent out there without issue. There was never strange noises or tracks, aside from a few snakes and foxes. Nothing ever bothered my animals. It was just a really peaceful place to live. Then one night I woke up to what sounded like a small tree snapping in half. I thought a dead one had finally rotted through, but then I heard a set of footsteps. Something on 2 legs. I didn't have neighbors. The closest house was almost 10 miles away. No one should be in these woods. They were coming closer. I wanted to believe a hiker had gotten lost and found their way to my cabin. That was the only logical answer, but a cold dread surged through me with each step. I couldn't quite force myself to stand up. The bottom half of the gazebo was walled in, but the top half was just screened between the posts. Only when the footsteps were coming through the tree line could I finally bring myself to peek over the wall's edge. At first, there was only a tall silhouette moving towards me. But as it stepped into the moonlight, I began to notice certain features. Its eyes shined like an animal's, but it had the frame of a deformed, emaciated human. Its neck was too long, and its stick-thin arms hung lower than its waist. Its shoulders rose to a sharp point with every awkward step, and it definitely didn't have any hair or clothes. I sank back to the deck, afraid of being seen, and listened as it continued to draw closer. My heart was beating in my throat, and then stopped altogether when the footsteps came to a halt just a few yards away. They were replaced by the sound of heavy breaths, like the creature was searching out a scent, presumably my own. I didn't know if that thing would be afraid of me, or if it would try to attack. I didn't really want to find out. Enough time passed in this way for me to deeply regret not rushing inside when it was farther away. I could have at least reached my shotgun and stood a fighting chance, but now I was a sitting duck. I couldn't stop thinking about all of the people who've disappeared in the wilderness and wondering how many had only lost their way. It's easy to do, and it happens all the time. But what if some of these people had simply run into one of these things? When it finally began moving again, it had a strange sound that I'm not sure how to convey with letters. I don't even know what animal to relate it to. It certainly wasn't a human-made sound. This was more like a buck's mating call, mixed with an angry cat. And the figure passed directly next to the thin wall I hid behind. I kept expecting its hands to tear through the screen and pull me out of the gazebo, but it just kept going like it hadn't noticed me. I listened for at least another 10 or 15 minutes while it walked through my yard making those awful noises. Then it finally began moving back towards the forest. Once it gained a little distance, I worked up the courage to take another peek over the side. It had a strange curve to its spine. It stood slightly hunched over. It would have been at least 8 feet tall had it been standing straight. It was moving slowly, but I continued watching it until it was completely lost in the forest. I planned to give it another 30 minutes before retreating inside, just to make sure it was really gone. But I still couldn't force my legs to work. I kept imagining that the creature had only pretended to leave so that it could draw me out, and I ended up staying in the exact same spot until the sun rose. Sadly, that was the last time I slept outside. I've had no desire to go into the woods at all since that day, and I sold my land a few months later. Now I live in a double wide on 2 acres where my neighbors are on the same road as myself. It's not crowded like in the city, so I kept some of my privacy. It could definitely be worse, but I do miss my old life sometimes. Even so, I just can't bring myself to go back. Maybe in a few more years I'll be able to go camping with friends again, but seeing something like this, it really changes your perspective. Sometimes I try to convince myself that it was all just a bad dream, but deep down, I know I was wide awake for at least a couple of hours before the sun came up, and I didn't sleep again until the following night. There's just no way I imagined it. Has anyone else seen something like this, or know what it could be?